pest house, where the plague was left to rot. They were places of fear, of darkness, of slow death. In the late Middle Ages, when the Black Death and its many kin returned again and again to Europe, the healthy needed walls between themselves and the sick. Towns could not allow the infected to remain in the streets, nor could families watch their homes dissolve into plague pits. And so they built the pest house, a grim house of rot, a barn or shack where the diseased were carried, abandoned, and locked away, left to their fate among others who shared the same black swellings and rattling coughs. To step into such a place was to enter hell. The pest house was rarely more than a crude building on the edge of town, often an old shed or a converted tavern, sometimes nothing more than a barn with its doors barred. Within, straw lay scattered in heaps, damp and foul with sweat, pus, and blood. Windows were few and air scarce. By day it stank of rot and fever. By night, it shook with screams, coughing, and the moans of the dying. To pass the road beside it was to gag on the reek, to hear the rattling of lungs and the weeping of those who knew the door would never open for them again. It began with the carts. When plague struck a house, the sick were dragged out. Families wailed as husbands were torn from wives, mothers from children. Some begged to follow, to share the fate of the doomed. Others hid the sick in cellars until the cough betrayed them, until neighbors reported the sound and the pestmaster arrived with his men. The pestmaster wore waxed leather and long gloves, sometimes even a primitive mask of herbs against the stench. With his staff he prodded the sick forward, or else dragged them out by rope, for he would not touch them. They were heaved onto carts already heavy with bodies that still moved, piled together like sacks of grain, then rattled away toward the edge of the town. The crowd would fall silent as the cart passed, some making the sign of the cross, others spitting to ward off the evil that rode within. At the pest house the doors groaned open. The stench rolled out, a wall of human filth and putrefaction. The sick were carried in or thrown in, and the door was bolted behind them. From that moment, they belonged no more to the town, nor to their families, but to the house of death. There was little food, sometimes bread crusts passed through a hatch, sometimes nothing. Water, if it came at all, was carried in buckets too filthy to drink. No priest lingered to comfort them. No physician dared to enter, save the occasional mad soul with a mask and stick. It was not a place of healing. It was a place of waiting, waiting for the buboes to swell, for the black spots to spread, for fever to consume the mind, and for the rattling breath to cease. Inside, the living lay among the dead. Straw was never cleared, bodies never removed until carts came days later. A man might wake in the night to find the companion beside him stiff and cold, his skin marbled with purple blotches, his mouth open in a silent scream. Women wailed, children cried until they had no tears, until hunger stilled them. The strongest wandered like shadows, scarred with boils, hacking up blackened blood. The weakest lay silent in corners, their flesh crawling with vermin. And always the stench, sweet and sickly, of rot and fever, of bowels loosed in death, of sweat clinging to filthy rags. Chroniclers described the sounds, moaning like cattle in slaughter pens, screams as the fever burned, the wet coughs, spattering phlegm and blood onto walls already painted with filth, and sometimes laughter, high, broken laughter of minds undone. For the pest house drove men to madness before it gave them to death. Some clawed at the doors until their nails broke. Some tore at their buboes, ripping flesh in delirium. Some prayed until their throats gave out, words swallowed by the groans of others. And some lay silent, eyes fixed on the beams of the roof, as though they had already seen beyond. Outside, people avoided the road. To live near a pest house was a curse. The air itself seemed tainted, The grass wilted where the filth ran out from under the doors. Children whispered tales that demons lived within, that the souls of the damned howled at night. Sometimes the healthy swore they saw faces at the cracks in the wood. Pale, hollow-eyed faces pressed against the slats, watching, pleading. Yet none would go closer, for to enter was to join them, and no one returned. Sometimes fires consumed them, when Pest raged too fiercely, when the house grew too swollen with corpses and the risk too great. Townsmen lit torches and hurled them onto the roof. Screams echoed within as the fire spread, as the living and dead burned alike, their cries swallowed in smoke. Some broke through windows and staggered out, only to be beaten back by poles and pikes, forced into the flames, for no one dared let them live. In morning, the house stood as a blackened ruin, its ashes mixed with bone. And soon enough another was built, for the pest always returned. The horror of the pest house was not only the suffering but the abandonment. Here was the truth of plague years. Love, kinship, compassion. All were drowned by fear. Husbands delivered wives to the cart and barred the door behind them. Parents dragged children from their homes and left them in the straw. Neighbors sealed one another out, for the plague made monsters of all. To survive meant to look away, to harden the heart, to let the pest consume others while you prayed it would not consume you. The pest house was the monument to this cruelty. A house of the living dead, an ossuary before the grave. But some said the pest house was more than mortal suffering. Priests whispered of demons who lurked among the dying, feeding on their fear. Some claimed to see shadows moving when no torch burned, to hear voices that were not human among the cries. In the night, the dying saw visions. Angels with wings of fire, devils with jaws of iron, saints who turned their backs. Some rose from the straw and screamed that hell was already here, that the pest house was its gate. When they fell again, their bodies writhed like things possessed. And when death finally came, it was no mercy. The carts returned, their drivers gagged with vinegar-soaked rags, their eyes watering at the stench. They pried open the doors, prodded the straw with their staffs, and dragged out the corpses, stiff or bloated, crawling with worms. Sometimes a body moved, groaned, begged. No matter, onto the cart they went, thrown atop others like wood for the fire. The wheels creaked as the load grew heavy, and the oxen strained to drag their burden toward the pits where lime and earth awaited. By the time the door closed again, new victims had already been shoved within. The pest house was never empty for long. For centuries they stood, on the edges of cities, beside lonely fields, by roads few dared to take. Some fell to ruin, their timbers rotting, their stones crumbling. Travelers told of strange lights flickering within at night, of wails carried on the wind. Villagers avoided the ruins, fearing that the pest still lingered in the walls, that the breath of the dead might still bring death to the living. And in some places the ruins stand still, overgrown with ivy, stones black with age. To look on them is to see the grave of thousands, to remember the time when men built houses not for the living but for the rotting. This was the pest house. No church consecrated it, no holy water blessed it. It was a place outside mercy, a cage for the dying, a pit of despair dressed as a dwelling. Its story is written not in books but in bones, in the stains of blood and filth that no rain ever washed away, in the whispers of those who passed and hurried their steps, in the nightmares of those who lived to remember the screams. It was and remains the darkest emblem of plague years. Not only that death came, but that men, in their terror, built walls around it and let it fester in the shadows, until the shadows consumed all.